For a development team that famously had never made a sequel before Hades 2, they're pretty good at making sequels. Hades 2 captures a lot of what I found fascinating about the first game with its creative portrayal of the Greek gods and other characters from myth and legend. The gameplay feels both familiar in the mechanics while also having plenty of new wrinkles to the system, both for Melinoe as a protagonist and the weapons and skills at her disposal. They've expanded systems for the base of operations without making the game feel stretched, and retained challenge and flexibility on how players want to proceed. In short, I think that anyone who was a fan of Hades will find plenty to enjoy in Hades 2, and may even occasionally find the sequel surpassing the original. Hades 2 is an action roguelike developed and published by Supergiant Games, the team behind Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and of course, Hades. While Supergiant Games had not done a sequel before, they embraced the chance to do so now because, according to the developers, there was more in Greek myth and stories they wanted to explore, and it shows. The game first released in early access in May of 2024, which is when I bought and first played the game, but I only went through a single run before setting it down to wait for the 1.0 release. Over the course of the next year and a half, the game received regular updates, expanding and refining until the full game was released on September 25th, 2025 for PC, Mac, Switch, and Switch 2. The game received near universal praise upon the release of 1.0, highlighting the presentation and expanded gameplay especially. The game's biggest critique came with the ending, which Supergiant went back and added scenes to in October of 2025 to address concerns. This edition was nice and all, but they did extend the requirements to get the ending right as I was finishing up said requirements, as they originally were, which was simply annoying timing for me specifically. As for sales, the game sold over 2 million copies in early access alone, so I'd say it's doing alright, although I would like to know what the current numbers are now that the game has properly released. I would advise those interested who have not played the first game to play that one first. Not only is it a really good game on its own, but Hades 2's story picks up after the events of Hades, and therefore incidental spoilers are inevitable. That also applies for those watching my story description in the next section, so now that you've been warned, let's talk about the story. In Hades 2, you play as Melinoe, princess of the underworld. When she was very young, her grandfather, the Titan of Time Kronos, emerged after knitting himself back together and took over the underworld from his son Hades. Kronos captured Hades and almost all of his household, all except Melinoe, who was whisked away by the witch Hecate and raised in secret. During that time, Hecate trained Melinoe for one task: to rescue her family and restore her father to his throne by killing Kronos. But how do you kill time? Well, we do it daily, but it's gonna be a harder task for Melinoe. After taking over the underworld though, Kronos has focused his revenge on Olympus, so Melinoe's task is twofold: to take down Kronos and protect Olympus with the help of the boons given by the Olympian gods. Before you set out on your nightly extermination mission, you will need to select a weapon. At first, there's only one to pick from, but as you gain resources, you can unlock more. Melinoe's weapons include a staff, twin blades, a skull, an axe, a pair of torches, and a coat that can fire rockets. Some of these weapons are very self-evident in how you play with them, but others, mainly the skull and torches, are not. All of them can be devastatingly effective though with the right build, so I recommend playing around with them and seeing what you can make. On the topic of things unlocking over time, this preparation space is also where you will select your initial keepsake, earned from building relationships with characters, and the pet accompanying you. Keepsakes give various bonuses such as additional money, rarer boons from gods, and additional death defiance, etc. The pets accompany you on your sojourns and can do various things to help you, from increasing your dodge chance to attacking your enemies. Once you're set with those though, and have beaten up on Skelemias to your satisfaction, it's time to head on out. With these dual tasks, Hades 2 expands the possible runs, although the mechanics of both remain the same. As Melinoe, you will enter an encounter, you must defeat all the enemies in the area to clear the encounter and get the reward. These rewards can be boons from the Olympian gods, boosts to your boons, money, currencies that you use back at base for things I will talk of later, a Daedalus hammer that upgrades your weapon, and health or magic upgrades. You can tell which one is ahead by the symbol on the portals to the next area. You also want to keep an eye out in each location for things that you can mine, seeds that you can dig up, fish that you can fish, or shades that you can rescue and bring back to the Crossroads. This is pretty much how it worked in the first game, with the main differences being the MP upgrades, which didn't exist in Hades, and an adjusted lineup of gods that you will be getting boons from. Sometimes, as you are exploring around, you can encounter gods or other people or creatures of Greek mythology who may help you in your quest. At the end of each location, though, you will face off against a boss intent on blocking your way forward. Once you've cleared that boss, you will proceed to a location to get some health back, maybe change up a keepsake, and then proceed onwards. As for the actual fighting itself, Millennium has an attack, a special, a cast, a dash, and omega moves of each of the previous except dash. Attacks tend to be closer range abilities, specials tend to be focused on enemies at range, casts trap enemies in a particular area, and a dash is, well, a dash. Omega versions of each of those use Millennium's magic or MP to enhance the attack specials or casts. They take time and MP to perform, but it's worth it at times to help defeat tougher opponents. Each of these can also be either transformed by the Daedalus Hammer or boosted by god powers. This system is where the variety in your builds comes into play, as a staff with a Zeus special and Demeter cast is going to require you to play differently than the same weapon enhanced by a Hestia special and Apollo cast. I did have my preferences for abilities formed over my runs, but I also believe I could make any weapons or god powers work by adjusting how I tackle the enemies. And that's what's important about systems like this, that all abilities are at the very least relatively useful. The enemies themselves also have a lot of variety, with unique types of enemies for each new area that you explore through. The plethora of different enemies means that you have to stay on your toes, especially when you first encounter them, but once you've learned how to deal with them, they gradually become less and less of a threat. The bosses suffer the same way, although the battles are still excellent and will test your skills with unique mechanics and twists on the formula so that you have to adjust. Of course, this being a Supergiant game, they've thought about how to keep the spice going in your battles, and you can up the difficulty with an optional heat difficulty that can give boost to your foes. I've always loved how the studio tackles difficulty because of how flexible it is to fit whatever challenge level you are looking for. If you want to just breeze through battles from the moment you figure out how to beat each boss and their patterns, then you're free to do so. And if you want to up that challenge to the point that it is insanely difficult, you're able to do that too. The other main part of the game is back at base, called the Crossroads, where you have an opportunity to interact with your allies and enemies. Hades 2 retains the social elements of the first game, where giving nectar to characters boosts your relationship with them, and introduces bathing, fishing, and going to the tavern together for relationship boosts as well. Once you've given a character a gift of some kind, you are able to get a keepsake in return for that gift. And yes, romance does exist in this game, as well as the original. Beyond that, you use the cauldron to cast certain incantations that will help you along your runs, farm and gather ingredients, do some shopping, and pick your arcana. The arcana cards are how you give Millennium boosts while going out, and you have a limited amount of grasp to select cards with. The arcana are the successor for the Mirror of Night in the first game, but with more limitations. That means you need to make some careful choices to fit your playstyle. You can also upgrade the cards with resources, some of which you only get by beating certain bosses, which I think is a clever way to put gameplay barriers in between certain progress milestones. As you proceed, the area will expand with more and more options to spend time in, but the Crossroads never feels like it's dragging you away from the main part of the gameplay. You're just enjoying a brief respite before you set out again. For presentation, Hades 2 retains the visual style of the first game with some adjustments. Some returning characters have changed designs, mostly in ways that I think still suit the characters or their changed circumstances. Truly, I think the character designs of the Hades games are one of the biggest highlights because of the way the artists have brought Greek gods and legends to life in creative and recognizable ways. Hades 2's color palette leans more into greens and blues than the first game's emphasis on red, and I think it gives Hades 2 a feeling of eternal twilight in the Crossroads and throughout the runs, which suits Millennium in the story. Musically, the musical tracks are just as memorable as the originals. The soundtrack brings more vocals into the music, with characters like Artemis, Apollo, Millennium herself, and the Siren boss all showing off their vocal talents. For those who don't know, this is a definite win for me, because I love when video games have music with vocals, whether chorus, duets, or solos. The voice acting is another solid across-the-board effort, and this marks the third game this year that I have played with Ben Starr in a significant role. His talent is leading him to being cast in a lot of fantastic projects. For UI and UX, it did take a little bit for me to adjust to the new system, especially with the Omega moves and hexes for combat. My hands had to be busier for Hades 2 than for the first game, which is fine but could cause issues for other players. I did show in my playthrough that you really don't need to use either mechanic to beat the game, so it shouldn't be too much of a deterrent to determined players. Hades 2 has a presentation style that suits the series while also carving out its own identity from its predecessor, especially visually. Supergiant's artistry shines through each part of the game. Hades 2 is a worthy sequel in every way. Novelty is always going to help games stand out, and Hades 2 does enough to keep the experience fresh and familiar to the fans of the first game. Hades 2 has my definite recommendation for fans of the first game. For those who didn't enjoy the first game though, I do not think there is enough difference to likely sway you, but who knows? What did you all think of Hades 2? Would you like Supergiant to keep going and make Hades 3 or move on to a new project? Personally, I would vote for the latter. If you have not already, I truly appreciate all of you who take the time to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and happy gaming.